Hello everyone and welcome back to the video. Today we're going to be talking about the best civilizations on 1v1 Arabia, which is the most played game mode in Age of Empires 2. And of course, we're going to be making a tier list out of it. So we've got 50 civilizations, and about a month ago, we got a new patch that kind of introduced a lot of balance changes around the 5 new civs, but also tweaked a few of the bad performing civs and kind of nerfed some of the strong civs. So it's a patch that kind of balanced things out a little bit, and we're now coming in with the October 2025 format, and I don't think we're going to get another patch soon, so this tier list should be solid for the next month or so at the very least. Of course, I'm just guessing, but that's kind of where I'm at right now with what I think is coming for the game. So I want to talk about a few things before I hop into the tier list. So firstly, this tier list is obviously 1v1 Arabia, and I'm going to be referencing a few things with this new Arabia script. So in the last patch, which is a month ago, we also got a new Arabia script, which introduced a few things that, quite frankly, I'm not a fan of, but that's a topic for another day. But there are a few things that I will mention throughout the video that really impact the meta. So first off, there is, generally speaking, a lot of hills on the map. So to the point where it's really hard to expand and really hard to find town center spots on the map. And on top of that, it's also really difficult to come back into the game after you've lost the map control. There's a lot of middle hills, really, really massive hills in the center of the map. So whoever controls those will have a massive advantage. This leads to a faster paced, more snowbally meta, and it also leads to less comeback potential. So the slower civs have a harder time competing against the faster civs. And on top of that, there's a lot of emphasis on early imp play because a lot of the golden stone is towards the center. The neutral golden stones were put towards the center, meaning whoever controls the middle hill has access to extra golden stone right away without needing to expand to the sides. And the guy who does not have access to the middle hill loses access to any potential side resources like on previous versions of Arabia. Nowadays, there's basically nothing to expand to on the sides, so it's either you get the center or you don't have anything to play for in terms of extra resources. So you could still expand and try to make something work with food and wood, but golden stone will be very hard to come by if you do go for this approach. Another thing I'll be referencing is the neutral deer that affect mostly the high elo and not so much like the intermediate and beginner players. But it is still worth mentioning that there's on every Arabia gen, so on every Arabia game you play on the rank ladder today, there's going to be 2 patches of 3 neutral deer, usually in the center of the map, but sometimes far out on the side. And these are lureable, so pro players will lure the neutral deer if they find them, and that will play a small role in the current meta as well. So with that said, let's go ahead and hop into the tier list. I will do the tier list a little bit differently this time. As you can see, I've added in another tier. So now I have 6 tiers. So I've got the OP tier, the S plus category, and then the S tier, which is just the top tier civs. And what I did is I actually already made the tier list. I have the tier list over to the left of me here. And this is cool because now I get to build the tier list from the bottom up, 1 tier at a time, instead of going alphabetically, which is what I normally do. So I'm going to try this format out. There's a few benefits. For those who don't have a lot of time at home, you can kind of skip to the top tier civs, and you can hear my thoughts on those specifically. And we'll have timestamps in on the video to make that easy for you. But for those who do have time, remember to watch the whole video because YouTube watch time matters a lot. And hopefully my my thoughts and commentary on the different civilizations will be interesting to listen to, even if they're not the best civilizations. So I think that's an advantage. And then the other advantage is I get to talk about the same tier civs at the same time and kind of draw comparisons between them. And it's going to be a lot less jumping around from one tier to the next, talking about an OP civ and then talking about a bad civ right afterwards. So hopefully a better structure to this tier list. Okay, 4 minutes of rambling out of the way. Let's go ahead and get started with the D tier. So if you notice, I didn't call it a bad category. I called it a subpar category. And the reason for that is because I don't think there's any bad civs in the game right now, which is great. Balance news, balance-wise, that's great. And the first civ, and actually the worst civ on the tier list, will be the Sicilians. Now, the subpar category will be mostly civilizations that are very slow to get going, or those that don't have any early imp power spike, or those that die in early imp specifically, because as I mentioned earlier, if you lose the map control to some guy who's going for a faster imp and you're going to get trepped from a hill, it's really hard to come back no matter how good your farming economy back home is. And Sicilians is the biggest victim of this. They have a really good long-term farming economy, really good conversion from wood to food on their farms. They don't have to reseed them as much and whatnot. They also build their TCs faster. But all of these is more of like a slow build up. You build up a big economy and then you go for like a solid late game. The only issue is the Sicilian late game is really not that great. It's okay. It's solid. But they're missing some key options like bomber cannons and whatnot to push back, some guy heavily fortified on a hill. And they also don't have any option that really brute forces their way up a hill. So maybe you can do something like siege ram halb, or maybe some kind of like Holbrook cavalier play. But those options are a little bit slow to get to, and chances are you're going to be falling very far behind as the Sicilians, anyways. And then the Sicilians don't really get anything crazy in terms of early game play. The one thing I do like though is that now you can build the dungeon in Dark Age, and so the Sicilians get off to a decent start because of that. I'm not going to say a good start, but a decent start. You can, put a dungeon in Dark Age on, your gold, and then you can go ahead and, have a nice setup for Feudal Age. You don't need to make the barracks, and you can just make the stable or the range right away. And then you can make spearmen and sergeants out of the dungeon. So you kind of have like 2 production buildings at the cost of 1. But it's not the craziest bonus because Khmer do that but better. So nothing too much to brag about. Next thing I want to talk about is the Bulgarians, which is the second civ on our tier list, the second worst civ. It's unfortunate because I thought the Bulgarians would get better after the meta arm patch, and they have. Like, the Bulgarians are actually a somewhat okay civ still, despite them being in the D tier. However, I feel like they're a bit predictable in the early game, and they suffer the exact same problem as the Sicilians. You can do a lot of cool things in Castle Age with map control and going for crap posts and whatnot, but you lack a lot of power in the mid game. And in the early imp specifically, you are at your most vulnerable because you basically have to wait until Cavalier kicks in, or maybe you can rely on Elite Skirm, but you don't have crossbow nor arbalest, and you also don't really have bombard cannon or anything that comes in early imp that really like does a lot, like no hand cannoneer. So it's really just difficult to find a good way to transition into a good solid late game with the Bulgarians. Chances are you're going to have to do some damage in the early game, but it's quite difficult to do that because the meta arms are a little bit too predictable with this civilization. So although it's a very powerful civ at going for meta arms and trying to pressure, or even scouts with fast upgrades via cheaper blacksmith upgrades, it's still a little bit too predictable, and it's kind of like your opponent knows you have to do damage, so he kind of just plays defensive, and Bulgarians naturally fall behind from there. I do think Krepos rushing the center and taking the middle hills in Castle Age could be something to consider, and something potentially strong, but the only issue with that is that usually you get pushed back by trebuchets from your opponent getting to imp, and then if they are able to reclaim the middle hill, when they're imp and you're not, you're basically screwed. There's no reclaiming that one. So that's kind of like the main issues with Bulgarians. And again, very similar to Sicilians, you kind of build up your economy with your cheaper town centers, but you're not able to really lock down the middle hill in early imp. Next up, we got the Spanish. Spanish is actually interesting. I personally consider the missionaries from the Spanish to be, I don't want to say it. It's a very taboo word. I think they're overpowered, honestly. I think they're absolutely broken. But the issue is, the Civ really has nothing besides missionaries. So I've played the Civ a few times on the ranked ladder, and I posted some of these videos to YouTube actually, and their missionaries are insane. Like I've taken games from stronger Civs, from really strong players, just because they can't deal with the missionaries or they underestimate them. Missionaries on the latest patch now benefit from cavalry armor, so you end up with a 65 HP unit in Castle Age, which is a mounted monk, and it also benefits from husbandry, so it moves really fast. And on top of that, it gets +2 armor, so +2 melee and pierce armor from the blacksmith, which is absolutely ridiculous. And if you get the unique tech, it gives it an extra range. So now you're looking at 7+1 range in Castle Age, and then potentially you're looking at 10+1 in imp if you get block printing, or is it 7 plus? I think it would be 7+4 in that case. So 11 range in imp, which is absurd. A mounted monk with 11 range that's also tanky. You can go up to 4 pierce armor in late game. It's a really strong unit, basically. And I think that unit specifically carries the Spanish now. It's not the Conquistador, although the Conquistador is still a decent option, but the Missionary is really what carries the civilization. But I think despite that, it's still objectively a subpar civ. But I will say, like, a little caveat, that the Missionary could carry the civ a lot harder than subpar. But overall, I don't think the civ is doing much. You basically just have nothing really going for you. You rely on your unique unit, missionary, and conquistador. Besides that, you don't really get crossbow. Nothing is really a good opening with Spanish. Everything's just okay for the first like 20 minutes of the game. You can go scouts, you can go men at arms. But besides the getting 20 gold per upgrade bonus and the faster building bonus, which are 2 minor bonuses for early game, you really just don't have a lot of strong bonuses towards anything aggressive nor defensive. So You're basically just playing a generic Civ that's hoping to get past the early game, which I don't think is a very good strategy now that we're in a snowballing meta. Next up, we got the Britons. It's really a shame that Britons are so far down the tier list because I think the Civ is objectively, like, well, not objectively, but it's very, very popular in the fun categories. A lot of people have it as a fun Civ and a Civ that they really enjoy. Um, but it's just not performing very well. And the average Britain experience ends up being very not fun. So when you think of Britons, you think of like, okay, I'm going to, have 40 longbowmen and 5 trebuchets and 30 halberdiers to protect them. And I'm going to have a strong, solid push. And that's going to win me the game. But the usual experience is that you were just getting obliterated by skirmishers in the mid game, and you're forced off of archers very early on. Now, I will say that the archer mangonel push from the Britons is a very solid one, and it's a very strong option. So it does have some plays, but more often than not, you're going to get maps where it's going to be a little bit tricky. You can't get to archers at all, and you're going to be facing elite skirmishers very early on. And that's going to push you off your strong options and off your game plan and make the game very difficult to play. So for that reason, I feel like Britons are just, not the best at the moment. But I do think the Civ is still okay and can be really, really strong if you get going with the longbowman at some point in the game. It's just difficult to do that. Next up, we've got the Slavs. We got 3 more Civs for the subpar. Slavs are a Civ I want to like, but the more I play them, the more I realize that like I don't really have any position in the game where I feel like the Slavs stand out. I think they're decent in a lot of positions. Like you have a good farming economy, so just opening scouts or men at arms is solid. I think you do get free arson, so their men at arms skirm rush, for example, is a good option. But they're not the best at scout rushing. They're not the best at going men at arms skirm. They don't have the best follow up from there. Like you could say, okay, a 1TC push is nice with Slavs, but other civs can do a 1TC push better. And then their late game is good on paper because you have a lot of farms and whatnot, but you have a bad early imp, and then because you don't have hand cannoneer, you don't have bracer, you're lacking bombard cannon. A lot of the early imp options are gone, and so your late game is now having to overcompensate for your weak early imp, but you don't have the most amount of options to play a solid late game. It's not like you're a late game powerhouse like Magyars or Berbers that will come out with a strong backline unit. So you end up feeling a little bit, underwhelming in a lot of cases. All right, moving on to the next civ here, we've got the Burmese. So I told you guys I'm going to make this list as objective as possible, and unfortunately I love the Burmese, but I have to admit, I don't think they're a very, very good civ at the moment. I will say that their early game is solid. I think your men-at-arms skirm rush is really, really strong, getting access to a free wood upgrade. They feel nice out the gate, but the main issue is you don't have the +2 armor on the skirms. Now, this was never really a problem when you had the neutral resources towards the side, and you can actually go ahead and expand and potentially play out a late game with Burmese that doesn't rely on elite skirm having extra armor. But nowadays, because the middle hill is so important, again, I keep referencing that, Burmese never have the time to get to like a big cavalry play in Castle Age. So you basically have to go for their other options, which are something like, Arambai, Monk Siege, a few units into maybe a faster imp, something that leans on more of their arena strengths. But I think that's a very hard thing to do because your early game usually relies on men at arms, which doesn't lead to a nice castle timing or a nice castle age push. So your bonuses are not really meshing together correctly with the Burmese to create a good harmony for a civilization. Normally, you're playing men at arms, a lot of archer skirm units, then you get the castle age, and the natural thing is to boom. Problem is, if you start booming and you're on skirmishers versus some other guy going archers, if he is able to get to a faster imp, what do you do? Like, actually, what do you do as the Burmese? It's really difficult. You're lacking armor on the skirm, so buying time with skirmishers or even just going skirmishers in imp is hardly an option to counter a DPS unit like the Arbalest or the Heavy CA. So you're basically stuck in a situation now with the Burmese that you want to play skirmishers in the early game to follow up with your men at arm rush, but you don't want to play skirmishers afterwards, which is really tricky. So I feel like Burmese is a civ that's okay. It's not bad, but the more you play it, the more you're going to run into situations where you have to play skirms and you're just missing armor and it feels bad. That's the reality of it, and that's what I'm feeling the most at the moment when I'm playing the Burmese. I don't feel like I've got the time to tech into other options and to go for a big economy that can maybe get to Hussar, maybe get to Elephants, and I can actually do something in the late game. Usually I'm dying way before that. And the last civ on my subpar category is the Goths. Similar to some of the other reasonings on this list, the Goths are very slow to get going. I think you start out really strong, so it's kind of like the Bulgarians, where you have a decent start. You have extra hunt coming in. You have cheap infantry, so going for a meta arm rush is super viable. All right, meta arm skirm is solid. It's still one of the best strategies of the meta. Don't get me wrong; it's a good strat. But the issue is your follow up afterwards is very slow. It takes a lot of time to build up your economy to get to that infantry spam late game that the Goths are known for. But the issue is if you get to infantry spam late game, but you don't have the center, all right, you didn't get access to the middle hill, it's going to be really hard to actually like do something with your infantry. And on top of that, it's very difficult to expand on the current Arabia. And so going with the Goths and hoping to get to infantry spam in late game basically implies that you're going to try to expand and get a lot of economy rolling. And then you're going to also try to somehow either push back the middle hill or somehow try to maintain the middle hill while booming your economy. So you're trying to do too much at the same time. And if you're not able to do that, you're going to run into some problems when you actually get to your civ's strengths. So I think the Goths rely very heavily in the early game, and they can still work in certain situations. But their general game plan of booming to a solid infantry spam late game is a lot harder to do on this current patch with the current Arabia. So that's going to be it for the subpar category. As you can see with these 7 civilizations, they're basically all infantry-based civs or cavalry-based civs that don't have a solid early imp, power spike, and they take a long time to get going without having, a consistent advantage throughout the game. So to lean on. So that's kind of the problem with these civilizations. But I will once again remind you that all of these civilizations can still be very playable. It really just depends on the situation. And if you can, overcome their weaknesses, they can even feel very strong at times. Next up for the C tier, we've got the Turks, the worst of the C tier, but in my opinion, still a bit above the subpower category, just because I like the options that the Turks brings to the table. I think you have really solid scout line, so scouts into light cav with extra pierce armor always feels nice. I think the gold bonus is nice to play a nice archer switch in the early game. And I think just playing something defensive in early game and then getting towards, your cav archers in the mid game to reclaim the map control ends up feeling really nice because all of a sudden you're scaling towards one of the best Imperial Ages in the game. Heavy CA with 100 HP, full upgrades, Histar with extra pierce armor that comes in for free, and then Bombard Cannon with an extra 2 range. It ends up being a really strong civilization. And you have a lot of things to scale into. And I'll also add on that Turk's early imp is fire. It's really good. You get free chemistry, free Hussar upgrade, so a lot of power spikes to look forward to. And I feel like if you want to get the map control in Castlage, you can also do that by going for a forward castle and landing some Janissaries, straight out the gate, straight at your opponent's doorstep. And that could be a really good way to actually end the game, or at least win the map control in Castlage. So I feel like Turks have a lot of things going for them. The only reason that they're far down on the tier list still is that I think that they lack a good eco bonus besides the gold mining. And on top of that, they are lacking elite skirmishers. So similar situation as the Burmese, where you're really just not going to have anything to make up for the lack of elite skirmisher. The only thing, though, that makes Turks a bit better than Burmese in that sense is that Burmese rely on going into skirm early to support their meta arm rush. Turks rarely want a meta arm rush. Usually you can get away with a scout rush, and usually you can actually lean on your light cav to overcompensate the lack of skirms. Burmese have no such option. So Turks make up for the lack of skirmishers in a better way than the Burmese do, and therefore place a little higher on the list. Next up, we got the Teutons. The Teutons used to be a civ I hated, actually, but throughout the years, I've actually turned to actually liking the civ quite a bit. I think the worst Teutons ends up being when you play scout opening with the civ. It ends up feeling like it's the worst way to play the civ because you end up in a lot of situations where you're going scouts against someone else who can switch to cav archers, and then you're in a really tough position as the Teutons because you don't get husbandry. So chasing cav archers is a nightmare. And then you don't really scale that well in the cav department. Like, yes, you do get paladin, but you're still lacking husbandry and you don't get light cav upgrade. So like going into cavalry is basically saying you're only going to go into nightline that lacks husbandry. No camels, no step lancers. It's very predictable. So going scouts with Teutons ends up feeling like, okay, this civ sucks. But as I've, developed as a player, I started seeing the benefits of opening something other than scouts with Teutons. I feel like it's actually an archer-based civ or an archer skirm civ that could open infantry. because you end up getting really cheap farms that fuels your archer or skirm play in the early game because you can save a lot of that wood and spend it on range units. So your economy is like silky smooth out the early game. And then you can just transition into either hen cannoneer, infantry, or cavalry later on in the game once you've established a good, control of the map. And I think the crenellations upgrade with 2-ins lets them defend against bombard cannon rushes very nicely and lets you control the map extremely efficiently in the late game. 8 plus 5 range castles, that's 13 range. That outranges pretty much everything in the game besides a trebuchet. And of course, a Turk bomber cannon, which is right there, so I have to mention it. So you end up being in a position where 2-ins feel nice once you get the map control and start spamming some castles. So I like the Civ, but I highly recommend you open infantry or range units with it and only go into cavalry later on as a tech switch if your opponent is disrespecting the cavalry play. And that feels like a much better way to play the 2-ins rather than just opening scouts. Even though the scout opening feels natural because of the cheaper farms and you're going to make a lot of them, you end up running into a lot of sticky situations through the lack of options afterwards. Next up, we got the Koreans. The Koreans would be lower on the list if not for the Fire Lancer. I don't like the Koreans. I think they're a very slow civ to get going. I think they die to a lot of rushes. And I think that in general, they have to lean on their archer skirm line. And they do get nice discounts there. But they get very little other options. Like you can't really open infantry with the civ efficiently because you get no bonuses there and no economy bonuses besides stone mining that comes in a bit faster. But that doesn't help you develop. And so you're in a situation where you have to play archer skirm. You're very slow, turtley civ. And then your late game is a bit one-dimensional in the sense of like range units and cannons and maybe halberdier. However, the addition of Fire Lancer completely changes that. Fire Lancer now gives you a really strong early castage option. They're cheaper with the Koreans as well. So fast castle Fire Lancers with rocket carts is a very strong strategy. And it could definitely be viable with the Koreans. Or just a Fire Lancer switch in castage. But more importantly, Fire Lancers in Imp now solve the Koreans' main problem, which is dying to a Hussar skirm setup in late game. So Koreans can play Halb skirm, but that feels like, okay, well, if your opponent goes Hussar skirm, his skirm kills your Halb, and then his Hussar raid you and, snipe your siege and kill your skirms. But now they have Fire Lancer. Fire Lancer solos that comp. So Koreans are much better because of Fire Lancers now, and if they didn't have them, they'd be a lot more predictable and a lot lower on the tier list. So I think I'm going to put Koreans still at the C tier, but I think it's a very, very decent civ now. And I think the Fire Lancers kind of carried them going into mid and late game. The late game with Koreans now is insanely strong if you get there. Like cheap skirms, Fire Lancer, bombard cannon. I mean, what even beats that comp? If the guy goes champions, you have Arbalest and Hen Cannoneer. And of course, it is worth mentioning the War Wagon is a very legit option for the civ. The only reason I don't mention it as like a crown jewel is because I think the War Wagon gets counted a little too hard by monks in a 1v1. So besides monks countering them hard, I think the War Wagon is a fantastic unit and definitely something that you could really lean on with the civ. Next we have the Cumans. I'm not going to talk about the civ too much, but I'm just going to say that it's a decent civ. If you like 2TC booming, then Cumans can feel really good. If you don't like 2TC booming, this civ feels like it's the worst in the game. I will say though, 2TC boom is a lot easier on this current meta. Because although you don't want to give up map control in Imp, giving up map control in Feudal Age is not the worst, and usually you can wall up pretty easily. Like usually it's going to be a pretty easy to wall Arabia, and so I think you can get away with a Cuman 2TC boom and then try to reclaim the map control in Castle Age. I think it's a legit option. So the civ feels good if you like them, but if you don't like that style, just avoid it. It's really just not that good of a civ besides the 2TC boom. And I think if you're not 2TC booming with the civ, you're not really playing it correctly. However, I will say that sometimes I don't 2TC boom with the civ because I don't like 2TC booming. So, and it does feel like it's a pretty bad civ if you don't do that. So you could get away with not 2TC booming, but it's not going to feel like a good civ in that case. So for that reason, I'm going to put it in the decent category because it has options, but it really relies on that one strategy. Main reason the civ is just not that good besides the 2TC boom is that you're just lacking. You're basically Slavs, but worse. Like you're lacking options. You have no bracer. You don't get like Arbalest. You don't get any like early in power spike. You have nothing crazy in late game. You're missing bombard cannon, missing hand cannoneer. So you're kind of like a weaker Huns, if that makes sense. Speaking of Huns, they are actually next up on the category. Yeah, a little bit stronger than Cumans, but the thing about the Huns and why they're not higher up is that I think that this is the peak civ of what dies in early imp is the Huns basically. So like the Huns you have a lot of weaknesses in the late game. Like, just look at the tech tree. There's a lot of holes in the tech tree. So you're basically forced to make something happen in Castle Age and in the early game, which I think is a reasonable option. Like, the Huns can definitely do that. But you run into a lot of situations where you're not able to get enough damage with your cavalry and cav archers, and your opponent can kind of just like defend until he can get to imp. And if you're the Huns and your opponent gets the imp and he's got the middle, it's really tough. However, I will say, I think the Tarkin transition with the Huns is very legit. So if you're able to like make a Tarkin transition against a guy that's going like Arbalest Skirm mostly, I think you're gonna completely roll him, because the Tarkins have 8 pierce armor after getting full upgrades, and they can also take down buildings very efficiently. So if you can get to Tarkins and do a nice switch there with the Huns, it feels good. But there's one combo that the Huns really can't beat, and they struggle a lot. It's the Camel Skirm comp. I think if you're playing against a Camel Skirm Civ and you're the Huns, like for example Gurjaras, Hindustani, Saracens, I don't think Huns have a good answer to that. The best thing I can come up with is maybe just like heavy CA Hussar Halb, and just kind of like try to mix those units together in a way that, you know, gives you the upper hand in fights. But Hun Halberdier is missing the last armor upgrade, which makes it a little bit too vulnerable to enemy skirmishers. And for that reason, I feel like the Huns just can't get anywhere higher than C tier with a clear conscience. Next up, we got the Bengalis. A decent civ. You build up with, you know, your free villagers. You have awkward holes in the tech tree though, like you're missing knights. Like, there's so many new civs that just miss knights. By the way, like I'm really not happy about that. But you miss knights, which just feels awkward. The Wrath is one of the clunkiest units in the game. Like, genuinely, like if someone has tips on how to control the Ratha, like let me know, because every time I feel like I'm playing with the Ratha, or sorry, every time I'm playing with the Ratha, it feels like I could be playing better, just because I'm not controlling the unit correctly. And I'm always confused as to like what mode they're in. It's really clunky and hard to use. So I feel like the Civ's okay, but it ends up just feeling, it ends up just feeling like you don't really have a good cavalry-based option in the mid game. Late cav's okay, but besides that, you really don't have any other options. And then early imp plays, again, missing hand cannoneer, missing bombard cannon. You have bracer skirms, missing arbalest, missing cav archers. I mean, there's just so many things missing that although you have a good economy, it just doesn't feel like that give a civilization. Next up, we got the Bohemians. I think the Bohemians are really good at one playstyle, which is like boom to late game, but they're also good at another playstyle, which is anti-meta, which is basically just trying to confuse your opponent and then surprise them with certain rushes that you can do. For example, Hussite Wagon Rush, like getting to a castle fast and going unique unit. Very strong unique unit, hard to deal with. You can go Hand Cannoneer in Castle Age and get chemistry. Very strong rush, very hard to deal with. Mangonel, Hand Cannoneer in Castle Age, that basically beats everything in until Imp. So if you can get to that, it's insane. So I think surprising your opponent with like, you know, different early game tactics, like full wall, but then actually push instead of booming, or like pretend you're gonna go all in and then boom instead, or like go for a small monk rush, take the relics and then boom. You can do certain things like that because you have an insane late game, and you also have an insane rush potential. So you can kind of choose which one you want to go for, and you want to rely on your economy via mining upgrades. Getting the 4 mining upgrades for free means you can just go like 10 on gold, and then you can use the market to balance your economy. So your opponent can see 10 on gold and be like, oh shit, he's gonna rush me, which is what any other civ would do. But as the Bohemians, you can just use the market, buy food wood, add in town centers, and you get like a couple monasteries, pick up relics, and boom. Right, so you got a lot of options like that with the Bohemians, which I love. It's a very strong anti-meta civ, but in general, I think if you fall into the trap where you're just like fighting a lot of scouts, skirms, infantry early game, and you're stuck in feudal age, I think Bohemians feel like one of the worst civs in the game. So if they're playing your game with the Bohemians, it feels amazing. If you're playing the enemy game, it feels horrible. Next up, we have the Jurchens. I think the civ is like actually not the best right now. It's okay, but it relies kind of like the Huns on making some early damage. But the reason I have it higher than the Huns is my insane Fire Lancer rocket cart fast castle push that the Jurchens do the best. I honestly think I might be like 95+% win rate with the strategy. Like genuinely, it's I don't lose when I go for it. I think I lost like 1 out of 20 games. Like seriously, I've tried it so many times. First of all, it's a ton of fun. It's extremely powerful and has an insane follow-up. Even if the rush doesn't land and you can't win the game with the rush, it has a really good follow-up. So that strategy alone makes the Jurchens at least a C tier, maybe even higher. And I have a whole guide on my Patreon on how to do that. So if you want to play a really fun rush, probably the most fun rush in the game right now, check out the Patreon. There's obviously tons of guides there that you can look through on how to get better at the game. But there's the guide on that. I think you'll have a good time with it, to say the least. And if you can't afford the Patreon, then just check out some of my YouTube videos if you're interested and try to copy what I'm doing and try it out in your own game. I love that rush, and I think it carries the Civ. But besides that, I think the Civ just doesn't have anything crazy going for it. Its late game is okay. It's like a CA, Hussar Civ in late game. Actually, its late game is quite good because it does also get halbs that are decent, Bomber Cannon, Siege Engineer. It's like a good late game, but it's not like a great late game. So it's hard to lean on it like too much, but it's still, there in case you need it. I got 2 more Civs in the C tier. So next up, we got Saracens. The first of the Camel Civs, I feel like. Camel Civs generally rate higher up on the list just because I feel like Camel Civs are in a good position at the moment. Not because camels are anything special, but just because the camel civs end up just being good. Saracens is the least good of the camel civs because I think their uptime with the market, or like their market abuse in general, got nerfed a lot. A few patches ago, actually. But basically, they made buying food more expensive at the market. So it's not as abusable as it once was. But I think despite these changes, Saracens end up being a really solid civ. They have an amazing tech tree. They have good options. They have really strong camels in the mid game. 145 HP in Castle Age. I mean, sign me up. It's really good. Mamelukes are a good unique unit and can really shut down civs like the Goths, for example. So Saracens end up being like a really good cav civ counter. And they can also play archers and cav archers perfectly fine. So due to their wide tech tree and just like how smooth their game is with the market, I end up liking the civ, but it doesn't feel like anywhere near overpowered or anywhere near strong even. So I figured top of C tier makes sense. And then the last civ in top of C tier is one that I used to rate higher. It's the Incas. I don't know if it's me being bad, but I've fallen out of love with mesocivs in general, especially Aztecs and Incas. And Incas feel like they're the worst out of the bunch. And I was doing some thinking, and I think the reason for that is because like infantry plays in general got stronger across the board, which means going eagles is a lot harder to do now. So although slingers are an option for the Incas to counter enemy going longswords and whatnot, it feels like a lot of times you can't ever go eagles. So, okay, you're on slingers, sure. You're playing defensive slingers. And then your late game is just like nothing special. You get cheap trash units, which is nice. The Eagle Warriors for Incas feel like they're just not that good in a lot of matchups. I don't know why. It's just like a personal thing. They just don't feel that useful. And your late game is like overall okay. It's an overall solid late game. It's okay, like solid maximum. You know what I mean? So the civilization just ends up feeling like I don't know what the win condition is with Incas anymore. I think like I've tried some certain like strategies and whatnot that feel okay, but nothing feels amazing. What I will say is like the best way to play the civ is just like men at arms skirm with a lot of men at arm and skirmishers that you get discounts on, which feels okay. But again, the discount on the skirmisher is a food discount, and a skirmisher costs mostly wood. So the discount that the Koreans get is much better. So yeah, Incas for a variety of reasons just don't feel like that good anymore. But I still think they have, good options throughout the game, like, Skirm still being cheaper, Kamyuk being pretty strong, that they deserve to be at a decent category. Their economy is also pretty smooth, but nowhere higher than decent probably is right. Next up, we're going to jump to the B tiers. That's the end of the C tier. Again, mostly the slower base civs because we're in an aggressive meta. The last of like the slow civs here, we've got the Burgundians. Yeah, I'm looking at the tier list. This is legit the last of the slow civs. Every other civ is a fast civ. So Burgundians is a slow civ, and the reason I talk about slow civs versus fast civs is like Burgundians in general, they need time to build up. They get double bit axe in Dark Age, then they get bowsaw in Feudal Age. So you pay a lot of resources early to get more resources over time. So it's a slow, to develop civ. But the one reason why Burgundians are actually higher up in the list compared to the others is the Flemish militia that now come out of the barracks. They don't count as like a light infantry anymore, so they don't take bonus damage from skirms. This is a big win for the Flemish militia, which means that you can go Flemish militia and you can defend men-at-arms skirm rushes effectively, like very effectively. You can defend scout rushes very effectively. You can pressure with the Flemish militia. They're very cheap, easy to spam. And so that unit kind of carries Burgundians in the early game. And then their mid game is fantastic. Custodier, Cavalier, fast Paladin, and Imp, picking up relics that give you both food and gold. A lot of really good options from the Burgundians in mid game. And the early game is now buffered with the Flemish militia. Honestly, now that I'm talking about it, it might even be higher than B tier. But just to play it safe, I feel like B tier, it's a solid civ, still has weaknesses, like it can still die to meta arm rush pretty easily. If, for whatever reason, the Flemish militia don't defend you enough. But I feel like overall the civ is pretty good and does more things well than has weaknesses. Next up, we have the Gurjaras. This is a civ that was like a D tier of my last tier list, but it got massive buffs since then. The Gurjara camel. Oh, first of all, their berries, the 2 berries they start with, now give more food, which is nice. And it helps you in the early game. There's neutral deer on the map, which I said I'll reference, which means that you no longer have the situation with Gurjaras where you have chickens and you just don't have enough food. Now you can just look for the neutral deer, lure those in, and your early game is solid. And the biggest change for the Gurjaras is the fact that the Camel Scout gets an extra attack in early game. Like your starting Camel Scout in Feudal Age gets an extra attack. It goes from 4 attack to 5 attack. So this thing is a monster. It has 5 attack, 70 HP, and it's obviously a camel, which is insane. It gets bonus damage against other scouts. And then you can train them from the stable at a very fast rate now. So the Camel Scouts can actually come out the gate pretty nice. Now, I don't think you're going to go Camel Scouts as like a rush with Gurjaras. But what I do think is you can open Scouts, go for an only food unit. Then when you naturally take gold and you play towards Castle Age, on the way up, you can start massing Camel Scouts very easily. You can mass 4 or 5 after you click up the castle, maybe even up to like 8 or 9 from one stable just on the way up to Castle Age. It's ridiculous. They train in like 20 seconds. So you can really get good value out of the Camel Scouts now, and you can like basically win the whole map control in early Castle Age because you have 4 or 5 plus camels right at the gate. Your Camel Scouts turn into Camel Riders in Castle Age directly. And so the Gurjaras end up feeling really good after those buffs. So it was the worst civ, or one of the worst civs on the last patch, and since then its win rate has gone up, and in my opinion its viability went up, and it's now in the viable tier. Look how that works. Next up we got Magyars. Clean cookie cutter civ, beginner friendly. You just go Scouts. You have 2 bonuses stacking for Scouts. It leads to one of the best late games in Arabia. It's really, really solid. The reason it's not higher up is that it has no eco bonus, and it has no bomber cannon, it has no hand cannoneer. Just little holes in the tech tree that make it like a little bit vulnerable in certain cases, and sometimes you just get outboomed by certain civs. You just can't do enough damage. But if you just go like Scouts into archers, or like Scouts into like double stable, into like towers forward, you can get most of your games done in Feudal Age. Like genuinely, the civ is really strong. Like cheap Scouts that also get free attack, that's a pretty insane double bonus, and it kicks in really early. And I feel like the Magyar Scout Rush is one of the hardest things to defend in Feudal Age. So for that reason, I feel like it definitely deserves a high spot on the list, but it gets a little bit held back by some of the other weaknesses. Overall, a B tier seems fine for the civ. Next up, we got Dravidians. Again, one of the worst civs in the past tier lists, but now it ends up being a really solid civilization. It's a civilization that ends up just doing a lot. Like you can go men at arms for cheap. You can go, into skirmishes pretty easily. Your late game is now quite respectable. Elephant archers did get a nice change as well. They cost, I believe, less food, more gold, which means that they're easier to get to, or vice versa. It's hard to say, but I think there's some change there that I remember being favorable for the elephant archer. Someone can correct me in the comments, I'm sure. I think it was a favorable change for 1v1s. And so the Dravidians ends up being a pretty solid overall civ because now it can lean on elephant archers in late game. Elephant archers in general did get better. Standard battle elephants also got a little bit better as well. They resist conversion, so Dravidians can make a couple of those and be fine. So overall, I think Dravidians are a solid civ. Their most played and probably best opening is men at arms into skirms, but you can also just go for like a spear skirm forward, or you can just open like skirms from home and play defensive. You got a few options, mostly revolving around the skirms, but that's not a bad thing. Skirms are pretty meta at the moment, so why not? Next we have Ethiopians, one of my favorite archer civs at the moment. Really solid in terms of like power spikes throughout the game. Insane late game. The only weakness of the civ really is the fact that you don't get a consistent eco bonus. So if you get into like extended Feudal Age or like extended Castle Age, you end up being in a weaker spot because you get no like consistent eco bonus. You just get the resources on the way up, and once that power spec runs out, then you're a generic civ, and you lack bloodlines. So like extended Castle and Feudal Age is not great. You're dying to skirmishers most of the time because you can go skirms yourself, but then Ethiopian skirms don't really lead to good compositions. So you end up kind of getting pushed off like your strong units, which is the Arbalest line, which can be a little awkward sometimes. Overall, though, it's still a really good civ, and if you like archers, it's a good pickup. Next up, we got the Celts. I love the civ. I think the Woad Raiders got like buffed to the next level, by the way. Those things have, elite Woad Raiders have 15 attack. I can't think of another unit that has 15 base attack. Oh no, I can think of one. The War Elephant. I'm pretty sure the War Elephant in Castle Age has 15 attack. Okay, it's a Castle Age unit, but it's a freaking elephant. Like Paladin has 14 base attack, and the Water Raider has 15. So the Water Raider is actually insane at the moment. It's I think it's broken in some cases. Like it's a really strong infantry unit, and it feels like it's a good game plan to just build up into that. And then the Celts early game can play like meta arms. It's the fastest meta arms in the game. You can play, Drush. You can play all kinds of options that really feel good. So I think the Celts can kind of get by, get to like Archer Skirm, take the wood bonus. Siege is really solid, and then you can kind of try to get to World Raider and win the game that way in Imp. Next up, we've got the Aztecs. I think the Civ is, again, not as good as it once was, but it's still okay. Better than the Incas because you have the Relics win condition, which I consider to be very legit. I think the win condition for Aztecs is basically like play a solid early game and then get to something like, either, Eagle Warrior in Castle Age to pick up Relics, or maybe lean towards their Jaguar Warrior. I think the Jaguar is really solid. Has a ton of attack and is genuinely a good infantry unit. Actually, speaking of attack, I was talking about the 15 of the Celts. The Jaguar Warrior can go to like, I think it can go to like 20 something attack. 28? Is that right? I feel like 28 seems like too much attack. No, I think it's less than 20. I think it's 24 attack it can get, like maximum, but still ends up being absolutely insane in late game. So Jaguar Warrior is really solid. And the Aztecs in general are a decent civ, but I think it just suffers from the general Mezzo lacking cavalry problems, and its late game is, if you don't get relics, this late game is a bit subpar. But the elite skirmisher is actually nice for the Aztecs. The Atlato skirm is nice. So yeah, it's a decent civ overall. Not much really to say about it. Next, we got the Franks. I love the civ. If it was up to me, I'd put it S plus. It's such a cookie cutter civ. Like scouts, knights, paladin. It's so nice. And throwing axeman's got a huge buff, by the way. So like Franks is actually in a legit spot at the moment. It's hard to put it higher than this, though, just because I feel like it always suffers from the same problems as something like the Slavs do, which is like early imp can be a bit tricky. But the Franks do get access to Hand Cannoneer and Bombard Cannon, which is something that Slavs don't get. So although you don't get Arbalest, you don't get Bracer, and you don't even get last armor for the skirms, so you have to get off archer units, you at least get Bombard Cannons, which lets you kind of survive in those like Archer v Archer or Skirm v Skirm wars for map control. And if you're able to get the Paladin, I mean, Frank Paladin, 192 HP, it's insane. It's a really strong unit. And then Throwing Axemen got a triple buff. They're like faster to produce, cheaper to get to, and their Bearded Axe upgrade now gives +2 range. So in total, an elite Throwing Axeman can have 6 range in in Imperial Age, excuse me, which is nice. 6 range is better than 5 range. It basically lets you kind of mirror the range of something like, it's a CA with no bracer. So it's not the most amount of range, but it's not bad. It's 1 off a Hand Cannoneer, which is it feels a lot better than 5 range, to say the least. And it's kind of like your main anti-Halb skirm comps, anti-trash unit comp. And on top of that, Franks get good infantry like Halberdier Champion full upgrade. So this civ overall feels good, but it just doesn't feel like anything special, which is why it's gonna stay at the B tier basically. Next up, we got the Japanese. I actually love the civ now. There's a time in I think I made a video. It's called like Spear of the Law, Don't Hate Me, or some cringe shit like that. But as if I was cringe of the past. That was like a year ago. It's not like I was young. I'm always cringe, guys. It's just how it is. But yeah, Japanese. I like the civ a lot now. I think their meta arm rush is insane. Like it's really strong. The Patreon build I have on the Japanese as well. You can do something like 18 pop meta arm rush. Don't tell anyone I said this, but I'm gonna try to come up with a build on Chicken Arabia that lets Japanese do the meta arm rush really fast, like 18 pop, like the Patreon build basically. And the theory is, I'm going to lower my voice so no one hears me. The theory is your opponent on Chicken Arabia doesn't have as much food as if it's Deer Arabia. So if there's boars and whatnot. So he has to defend your meta arm rush that you can barely afford with a good build. And he has to defend that with very little food. So if I can get something like that to work, I think it could be really nice. It sounds good in theory. Because the Japanese play chicken maps really well because you get like mills that cost less wood. So you can play chickens better than other civs. So that's why I'm kind of theory crafting that civ for the Lingyuan Cup, the Chinese tournament, Chinese land event coming up soon. But we'll see. But even besides that, I think the Japanese are a good civ. You know, you get really nice cav archers, you get really nice infantry, you get Arbalest, Bracer, all the upgrades, you get nice towers. It's pretty good. You just lack this, standard stuff like lacking some good cavalry in late game and lacking bombard cannons, which could hurt sometimes. Next up, we got the Wu. Probably the weakest of the new civs, to be honest. I think the civ is like okay. It's a bit awkward to play. It's like it has a really good infantry rush, and it went from like OP on the last patch to kind of like okay now because they now only get 55 food per building instead of 65, which I know is only 10 food, but like you do feel it a little bit. So I will say that the Woo is less snowbally than it used to be, and I think its best quality now is the Jan Swordsman, which is unchanged. So Jan Swordsman is still like a really good option, but besides that, the Woo doesn't feel like it has anything too crazy going on. However, the Jan Swordsman being a thing gives it really good, options against Archer civs, and basically shuts down civilizations like Mayans who don't really have a good counter to the Jan Swordsman at any point in the game. So, yeah, the Wu ends up feeling like an Archer civ counter that has a good early game. That's how I think of it. But it just feels like it's nothing too special as the game goes on. And yeah, nothing too much to say there. Two more civs for this list. For this tier, we got the Malians. Standard, solid, good civ. I'm not gonna spend too much time on it. It gets really nice bonuses in the early game, but at the cost of a slightly weaker late game. They're lacking key text like Bracer and whatnot. But actually, the Malians have a really good win rate right now, like 55%. So hey, maybe it can even be buffed to a strong category. I just put it in B tier just because I feel like if you're not able to win in Castle Age with your Archer play, which is usually where you're going into, I think the Civ can feel a little underwhelming. Going into the later stages. But even with that, I think it's a really good Civ. And yeah, I consider it a very, very, very like solid, straight out the gate Civ that can do a bunch of different options. So jack of all trades, master of none type thing. And I think the Malians, if you get a nice advantage, can feel like extremely snowbally. But if you don't get ahead, then they could feel a bit weak sometimes. Next up, we got the Armenians, which I will put at the top of B tier. This Civ, I don't really have a good explanation for why, but I think I win every game with the Civ. Honestly, like the Civ, the economy bonus on it is absurd. You get so far ahead just by getting upgrades through your mule cart. Like the mule cart economy is ridiculously good with Armenians. You're just working with so much extra res. And on top of that, I think the warrior priests are amazing for picking up relics. Their unique unit is one of the best backline DPS units in the game. And it doesn't die so hard as skirmishers, which is really important. So like the skirm meta doesn't really affect Armenians too much for their unique unit. And lastly, you don't have any holes in your tech tree besides missing bomber cannon, hand cannoneer. Like that's like the only two things you're missing, and siege engineers. So like your siege game is a little weak, but besides that, you get CA like solid. You don't have like a Bengali situation where you can't make knights and CA. You get knights, you get CA. Your cast H feels smooth. Your late game has good options. 100 HP champions being amazing on this current patch. So I think the Civ just feels like it's really strong and it's easy to win with. But the reason why it's not higher up is that, it just does lack certain options like +4 armor on Cav, the other things I mentioned. So it doesn't feel like it's overpowered, I guess, in any real way. So you just kind of get ahead and you have to end the game fast because your late game can be sometimes a bit awkward. That's the way I think of it. All right, now we're getting to the highest tier civilizations. So we got the Tatars for the first strong civ. The Tatars will always be a good civ in Arabia, but the more hills there are, the better the Tatars get. And right now, there's a lot of hills in Arabia, and Tatars feel a lot stronger because of that. So for that reason, I'm going to put them as a strong civ. And I think they're a bit above some of these civs just because, I think they just get to like their good units faster. Scouts into CA, scouts into Camel Knights. You have a really good late game. You have a pretty good economy with your sheep lasting longer, which really helps on Chicken Arabia, by the way, because you get a little bit of extra food, whereas your opponents can maybe struggle and, they might have to transition to farms a little earlier. There was a video I made where I actually clicked up to Castle Age without making a single farm with the Tatars. I think the title was why we should remove neutral deer. I did abuse the neutral deer in that one. But still, it's a very viable approach with the Tatars. You can just go up to Castle Age at lightning fast speeds because of the Civ, and you get a really good advantage because of it. So yeah, the Civ is just good in general, and at the moment with Chicken Arabia, I think it ends up being a good pickup. And the more hills there are, the better the Tatars, and right now there's a shitload of hills. Next up, we got the Poles. This is a controversial one. I think their win rate's actually really low. It's something like 45%, which is like really bad, by the way. But I didn't care. I know it's an objective tier list, but I think objectively, Poles are a really good civ. I just think they're hard to play, which is why the win rate's so low. That win rate, by the way, is at 1900 plus, if I'm not mistaken. So even like the good players are having trouble with the civ. But I think this is the time in history, very few times where I can say you're all wrong and I'm right. Like I'm just staring down 1,000 people and the 1,000 people are wrong and I'm right. I really believe, and I will debate this, that the Poles are a really strong civ in the current meta, because here's the thing: you get a really, really good power spike with your full work farms. So you're only weak in early feudal age, okay? But if you can survive early feudal age, you get 10% food back instead of 8% on last patch from your farms. Now, there's a lot of debate around this. Like, is it that much? It's only 2%. Yeah, it's only 2%, but these are the numbers that the polls came out with. And the polls on release were very strong. All right. And since then, we've gotten some additional buffs. Like the full work counts as a house. So now you make a full work and you get back 25 wood because it counts as a house. All right. You don't get back the 25 wood, but it counts as a house. So you can save a house, which does help. And on top of that, your bloodlines, light cav, and winged hussar upgrades are 50% off in terms of food. So you're stacking so many bonuses towards farming and going for a lot of scouts. Like your team bonus gives you +1 attack versus archer units for your scout line. So if you're just going scouts in early game and you get into like stone to go for towers, so scouts and towers all in feudal age, you're stacking 4 or 5 bonuses all together, which is insane. Like it's insane. It's so strong. No other civ can stack 4 or 5 bonuses in feudal age. And just try it out for yourself. You're gonna be up like 3,000 food over your opponent within like 20 minutes, 30 minutes. And this is in feudal age, not accounting for getting a villager lead through adding in town centers and whatnot. So poles are the very few civs that can get a castle age level economy in feudal age, and you can combine that with a really strong unit, which is scouts that get additional upgrades and additional bonuses towards them. So yeah, I think that just looking at that option, poles end up being very good. And I think your early game can easily be defended if you just tower up and play smart and place your buildings correctly. I think the poles, although they are clearly objectively weak in early feudal age, I think you can mitigate that a little bit and you can pass to their strong points in the game while taking minimal amounts of damage. And I think if you get to late game, poles easily the best late game civ on Arabia. I can't think of another civ that beats them if it's equal footing in late game. I think like the poles with the strong farms and the winged hussar, they get trample damage. Like it's just really hard to beat that. You need a specific situation like full stone wall, and you're pushing with like halb, heavy CA of like Magyars. And like that's the way you win the game, basically. And if you don't have that, I think the polls win every late game. So yeah, that's a lot of talk about the polls, but it's a bit of a controversial one. So I wanted to defend it before the comments start. But again, feel free to debate me in the comments, and maybe I'll get someone to debate me in a future video about it. Who knows? Maybe. Depends if people agree with me or not. I'm expecting people to disagree because the stats don't support polls being a good civ. Next up, we got the Berbers. The civ is perfect for current Arabia. Like, you play defensive early game, you try to wall up, and then Castle Age comes in and you get discounts on all stable units, like stable like Scout line, Camel line, Knight line. Perfect. But unlike the other Cav civs, you also get Genitor, which is a really strong skirmisher, a mounted skirm basically, and you get Bracer, you get Bombard Cannons, you get Siege Engineers, you get Cavalry Archers and Camel Archers. So like you have really good options. You get Bracer, Armor. You have really good options to transition into a good mid game and a good late game. So again, you're only weak in early feudal age, but I think the Berbers can easily defend now because you can just defend a little bit and then go Genitors, which are a really strong unit. They got buffed a few patches ago. So the Genitor are like cheap, easy to get to, and they push back all kinds of archer play that your opponent can go for. So yeah, I think the Berbers are in a good spot right now, and I think it's definitely a civ to rely on for Arabia. And I also think they counter a lot of the other skirm, archer / CA based civs. So for that reason, they also get a little bit of extra value. Next up, we got Lithuanians. Nothing much to say, guys. Like, really strong civ in terms of like scout, skirm play. Really good early game meta arms because you start with the extra 100 food. And on top of that, you can do the instant rush, which on chicken maps can be really good. So Lithuanians actually have a lot of options kind of hidden into their kit. And I think Lithuanians gives you a good, clear game plan. I'm going to play an aggressive feudal age, get the Cassage, and try to go for relics. And if you can't go for relics, you can just add in town centers and get 100 food per town center, which could kind of balance things out or give you something to fall back on. It is a little awkward choosing to go town center to get that extra 100 food or choosing to put all your resources into contesting the relics. But in current Arabia, I think you can usually squeeze in like 1 TC and then just go the rest of your resources go into getting the relics. And usually a 2 TC setup ends up being a very good way to get the map control for an early imp power spike. And Lithuanian's early imp is actually really good because although you don't get Arbalest, you do get hand cannoneer, you get faster moving skirms. So you can just get like skirm bombard cannon out pretty quick, and that beats a lot of like Arbalest cannon comps. So early imp Lithuanians ends up being really good. Next up, we got the Italians. I think the Italians are an insane civ at the moment. Like you just get extra armor since the new patch on their archers. and then the condottiero straight out the gate. So that kind of just like buffs what Italians were already good at. But in general, I feel like Italians are super slept on. Like they're just a good civ on Arabia. But that buff to the archer, I think, just kind of like makes them better at what they're already good at. So I don't know. I think the Italians can just open scouts, archers, infantry, everything that they want to. And then their castle age is also wide open. Kind of feels like Malians in the sense that they just have a lot of options open to them. But the key factor being Italians have a better late game than the Malians. And that's why I rate them higher up in the list. But they're very similar civs in how they function. Malians have a bit more of an eco bonus like behind them, like consistent savings, whereas Italians are more power spike based. But Italians do have some consistent savings, like university upgrades are cheaper, age ups are cheaper. You get extra armor on archers, so you do get like consistent bonuses when you add them all together. You do feel like you're getting something at every point in the game, which is nice. Next up, we got the Romans. The Romans are a really good civ, actually, especially for beginners. I think the civ is behind a paywall, so I'm sorry. Sorry to like dangle it in front of you. You do have to buy the DLC if you want to play it, but it's an insane civ. Like it gets a 5% boost on all economy, basically, and building. So like your village is just 5% more efficient. Congratulations. Like great bonus. Meta armor rush, fantastic. The extra armor on it, insane at lower elo. Pretty good at higher elo, comes up. And I just feel like the civ is the best of the civs that just want to scrap a lot. And the main reason for that is the cheaper scorpions. It did get nerfed on the last patch. But it was just a 10% nerf, and it's only on a gold discount. So I think if you're going to be in a position to go scorpions anyway before, you're still in that position now. So I don't think much changed. So I think the Romans, by the way, sorry, my cam keeps going down because like it's just like the setup. I just try to set up a bit more. But yeah, the Romans just end up being like a good civ at scrapping. If you're going scorpions before, you're still able to afford them now. The 10% extra gold doesn't matter that much. And I just feel like it's a civ that it just does fighting in early game and mid game very efficiently because you have the really strong economy behind it and you have really good options in terms of your units, like tanky infantry, cheap scorpions, full upgrades on knights, archers, whatever. Everything's there. You're missing Thumb Ring, but like in Castle Age, everything else is there. And yeah, it ends up just feeling like it's a good civ for the most part. Does run into some awkward situations in certain late games though. So that's like the biggest problem. But I think its bonuses are strong enough to where you can get by without having to rely on your late game. Very similar civ, the Vikings. And these two civs are very similar in the sense that they have a bad late game, but they get so far ahead in the early game that it shouldn't matter. So Vikings, again, really strong economy. Like, here's the thing. On this current Arabia, remember, if your late game is bad, it doesn't matter if you have the middle hill and you're able to push from there. That's the idea, right? So civs like Romans, Vikings, if you just get the middle hill and you're able to push and pile on the pressure, most games you'll be able to win just off that. So Vikings, similar to Romans, you have a really good economy, good early game with infantry, like extra HP and whatnot, and then you can just transition to like a good mid game. The downsides though to the Vikings, you don't get access to bloodlines, you don't get access to certain things that the Romans get. Like they get stronger cavalry, they get light cav, husbandry. You're missing bloodlines and husbandry with Vikings, so your cav is a lot weaker. But if you just go for like archers into a faster arbalest play, you can have a lot of success with the Vikings, and I do think their Berserker switch in Castle Age is pretty legit as well. So you have a lot of cool things that you can do with Vikings in terms of mixing archers and infantry, and you can just play cavalry as like a siege sniping like utility rather than like an army-based strategy. With that in mind, I think Vikings end up being a pretty good civ. You can also open scouts with the civ because you farm up really fast with the scout opening and then just switch to archers. Again, you can find a scouts into archers build on my Patreon. I just have so many good things there. It's hard not to shout it out. And last civ on the A tier, the Georgians. Speaking of scout opening, I think scout opening is the worst opening with Georgians in a lot of cases. The Georgians are the best, in my opinion, when they go for something that hits hard in early feudal. All right, and the scouts just don't hit that hard in early feudal. Like it's strategies that hit harder are like meta arms or tower rush. So those are like the two strategies that I think Georgians excel at the moment. So if you're able to do that and then transition to like a good mid game, Georgians feel insane. The reason why I say pivot away from scout opening, or at least don't open scouts every game, is because you don't actually get any bonuses on scout rush and feudal. The healing is now like non-existent in feudal age. So the healing scouts doesn't really matter until Castle Age. Then okay, healing on cavalry does matter for CA, knights, etc. Light cav, whatnot. So you don't need to worry about the healing cav until Castle Age. You can just do other stuff in feudal age, for example, like meta arm, put a lot of pressure because the free mule cart lets you get a really good early game, especially on chicken maps where you can basically use the mule cart right away, take chickens, and then use that same mule cart to go on wood. It's super cool. So you can do a lot of cool things with the Georgians like that give you an advantage in the early game. And then you can kind of snowball from there and get back to your really strong units, which is your cav-based units in Castle Age after you already have an advantage in the early game. And I will say, last thing about the Georgians, the Svan Towers, insane. Like amazing, amazing like tower rush potential and late game map control potential as well. All right, next we're going to move to the top tier. So here are the civs that are like the best civs in the game, but they don't feel overpowered. Like the civs I have in the OP category, the S plus, it legit feels unfair when you're playing against them. Like genuinely, it feels like you're losing and it's not your fault. But the civs in the top tier, usually you can do something against them. All right, they're just the best civs in the game. So first option is Byzantine. Now Byzantine, I lied earlier. I said that there was no slow civs. Byzantine is a slow civ. However, they pick up pace really fast because how Byzantines functions is that the more they trade with their skirmishers, their spearmen, their camels that all get discounts, the more they trade with you, the better they are because they're trading cheap units for your expensive units because most civs don't get discounts on units. And then they just get ahead through taking trade after trade after trade. And if you try to pressure them, they get free town watch and free town patrol, which gives them a lot of vision, very easy defense. They get buildings that have extra HP on. So again, another thing for defense. So it ends up being an impossible civ to push. And if you try to fight them too much, they're getting better trades. And Byzantine have a really good late game. So what do you do against this civ? And that's where Byzantine gets its prowess. And it's also extremely good against other camel civs because usually Byzantines, with their cheap camels, beat other civs that have bonuses on camels with camels. It's really strange. And if you can't beat their camels, you just have halbs as Byzantine. So yeah, it's very strange. It's a very strange dynamic. But yeah, the cheaper camels ends up being just a really good option in a lot of cases. And I think the Byzantines in general play out skirm camel compositions very well, very effectively. Next up, we've got the Mongols. I bet you expected this to be in the OP category, but unfortunately, the Mongols on the new Arabia, although the early game is insane, and you can usually snowball a little bit from that, if you get to their mid game, it's not nearly as strong because Mongols die in early imp. And remember, the biggest weakness of civilizations in general, or the biggest power spike, is the early imp power spike on this current version of Arabia. And if you can't survive the early imp power spike, doesn't matter how good your Mangudai are in late game, if you're completely dead and you don't have access to gold, you're just going to be running Hussar and skirmishers that lack upgrades into your opponent's gold units, and that's not going to feel good as the Mongols. So Mongols, although they're a really good civ in a lot of cases, and especially out the early game, they're an insane civ, they just kind of fall off a little bit in the mid game, a little bit too hard for my taste. So yeah, Mongols, one of my favorite civs, but it's still good. I mean, still S tier. I'm talking about it like I'm putting it in the ground and burying it. It's okay. It's still an S tier civ. It's actually good, but it's nowhere near an overpowered civ like it maybe once was. Next we got Hindustani. Hindustani is an insane civ. It has a low win rate right now. I looked through the win rate. It's 45%. Again, I don't care. The civ is objectively a really good option. You get really nice savings from the start of the game. And I think its low win rate comes from the fact that it doesn't have knights. And it could potentially lose to like Jan Swordsman randomly from the Wu. It has certain weaknesses that's like, it just ends up feeling a bit awkward. But it doesn't have anywhere near the weaknesses that something like the Bengalis have. So it has a lot more options. So you have like light cav, Hussar, full upgrades. You get you get access to Hen Cannoneer. You are weak to Fire Lancers though, because a lot of your comp is like Hussar, Skirm, and late game. But if you're up against Fire Lancer, you can go 9 range Hen Cannoneer, which destroy Fire Lancers. So you still have options against it. But in some cases, Fire Lancers can pose a threat. But yeah, I think Hindustani, you have a good, consistent early game, early to mid to late game, really eco bonus, saving food on villagers. So you're just getting consistent savings that way. And then you also have a good setup from start of the game to late game. You have good options at every point. So like you legit have no clear weaknesses with Hindustani besides lacking access to the Nightline. So for that reason, I think it's in the S tier. Next up, we got Persians. Persians is a civ that kind of like the other Cav civ, like Slavs, Bulgarians, needs time to develop. However, Persians, completely differently to those civs, Persians pulls ahead in terms of villagers in the early game, and they also get really good Cav archers as a nice option to lean on in the mid game. And on top of that, they do get Hen Cannoneer bombard cannon. So really, it ends up being nothing like Slavs and Bulgarians because you have a lot of the options they're missing. But yeah, Persians is one of the few civs that can get to the Paladin. In that case, in their case, Savar though. Savar are a better version of Paladin anyway, so it's not really a problem. But yeah, Persians ends up being a really, really good civ. And it just feels like it gets ahead just by playing the game. It gets like a 4-5 lead just out of feudal age half the time because your town center works faster. And you're also able to get to the next age faster as well. You get the extra resources in Dark Age, so you pull ahead early. Persians are just a good civ, man. And then late game, I think their Trash Bow is actually in a pretty good spot in the meta because Trash Bow does okay against Fire Lancer, which can help. And it also just trades nicely against some of the frontline, like Halberdier type units that you could face. So it lets your Savar shine, which is what Persians want to do. Also, their Elite War Elephant and War Elephant are really good now. Like I tried them out in a couple games, and like those things got a lot of sleeper buffs over the last few patches that they're actually really solid now, and they don't die to monks as hard. So I think that's a very legit option for the Persians nowadays. Next up, we got 4 more civs. We got Portuguese. I talked about them plenty, but for the same reasons that they were, pretty meta in the last tier list, they're still meta now. Really good gold options. Nice early game power spike with getting extra wood from the berries, and they're really good late game. You have everything you need. This is the definition of an early imp civ or like a double gold comp civ. So you just like get an advantage, take the middle, take all the golds and stones, and go all out gold units. 20% discount on anything gold. How easy is it to win with a civ that can get a 20% discount on everything gold? It's really easy to find a win condition, and I just realized there's a typo there. It's Portuguese instead of Portuguese. But yeah, just an insane civ at doing what it takes to win on this current meta, and it's a very strong option if you like to play with a lot of gold units. Next up, we got the Catans. Catans are very hard civ to judge. Their win rate says it's an OP civ, factually speaking. It's a 58% win rate at 1900 plus. And even in lower elos, like 1000 elo, it's still like a 55% win rate. So the civ is OP and overpowered by definition, but I think it's not that good. Just on like a personal note, I think the civ has some weaknesses. If you just play a defensive mid game and you turtle behind walls, Catans die to elite skirmisher, like genuinely. Like their cavalry units until imp die to elite skirm, because they don't have knights, right? So they die to their light cav has 4 armor, but it has 60 HP, so 30 skirms to hit a light cav. Their step lancer has only 2 armor when you get the +2, so it dies to like 30 skirms in 1 shot, which is ridiculous. So their step lancer is not that good. The light cav is extremely squishy. And forget about elite skirm. You can just play like cav archer or something like that, and you can counter a lot of the Catan melee units. Yeah, the Catan get access to heavy CA and castle age, but I think that's an expensive option. It's a bit hard to get to. And the Catans lost their Dark Age bonus, so they lost a lot of what made them feel broken in the past. However, I think they're still strong. The pastors are still good. Their units are still like really strong with the double attack, being a pretty big thing for what the Catans are likely to do. And I think they snowball very effectively, which is what you want to be doing on this Arabia anyway. So they feel like a good civ, and it is a good civ, but I don't think it's quite broken as the stats suggest. That's my personal take there. I forgot to mention the Liao Dao, the unique unit for the Catans. Insanely broken unit as well. Very, very strong. High DPS. One of the best infantry units in the game. Definitely something that the Catan lean on in late game. So I forgot to mention that. That's a really good late game option for the Catan. So you get advantage with their units and their good economy, and then you can finish the game with Liao Dao in certain situations. So the Catan ends up being really strong in those cases. Next up, we got the Vietnamese. S tier civ in pretty much every department. I think the Fire Lancer specifically, though, make it better than the last civ on the top tier, which is the Mayans, which I'm actually going to put behind the Vietnamese, specifically because Mayans lose to Vietnamese, and Mayans lose to random stuff like the Wu. They could even lose to the Goths. So they suffer from certain bad matchups. Like, for example, Koreans, actually. Like, Fire Lancers are really good at countering Mayans. Mayans are still an amazing civ. We'll talk about both simultaneously. Because they have a really good economy, really strong options, and 100 HP Eagles, Elite Plumes are all fantastic late game options. But Skirm Fire Lancer completely shuts down the civ, which I think is a big problem. And civ like Vietnamese, you get Imp Skirm and Fire Lancer with extra HP. Like, that's insane at countering the Mayans. So I think the Mayans are really solid, but they get countered by that comp, and Vietnamese are good in everything. But like they get CA that are really strong, they get a good economy, good savings. Rat and Archer is amazing as a nice anti-archer option. They also get Imp Skirm, which is an amazing all-around unit, but especially against Archer Halb, it's really good. You get Elephants that are solid. And then on top of that, you get the Fire Lancer now. That's a really good unit and an amazing like mid-game and late-game power spike. So it's a really solid civ, start to finish, and one of the best civs in the game at the moment. All right, last but not least, we're going to be moving into the S+ category, which is basically the 5 best civs in the game. You can obviously see them down here. It's no secret. So let's go ahead and start placing them. But the interesting part is hearing why they're OP. And again, a lot of them are not based on win rates. So listen up. Starting off here, we got the Khmer. The Khmer, very similar to the Poles, get ahead naturally in the early game. And kind of like the Khitans as well, because they have really good farms. And it's similar to the Slavs, but Slavs less so because their farm bonus kind of kicks in over time. The Khmer kicks in right away because you don't even need a mill for it. You get really good farms straight out the gate. They just collect faster than general farms. The food gets to your stockpile right away, which is amazing. And on top of that, you don't need a barracks as the Khmer. So you get a nice early feudal power spike, not needing a barracks. You get really nice farms straight out the gate, which gives you an advantage, consistent advantage from feudal age onwards, basically. And on top of that, you get pretty much everything you need with the Khmer. You get really strong, scout line, night line. You get, whatever you need for like archer, skirm, bracer, armors there. You're just lacking like, thumb ring. You get cav archers that are decent. You get extra one range scorpions, which are really, really good in mid game. And then you play towards a late game that is in theory the Khmer weakness. But the reason why I don't think it's that weak for the Khmer is that usually you can control the game to your liking as the Khmer. Because you get so far ahead, they can kind of take the middle of the map, start raiding left and right, and you can build up to one of the best units in the game, which is Ballista Elephant. So a lot of the problems of something like the Sicilians and the Bulgarians is that even if you get the middle of the map, you can't really build up to like a good unit. And these two civs, they get the middle of the map in Castlage through structures like donjons and Krepos and whatnot. Khmer gets ahead because they just get more units on the field, and those units are strong, and they get a really good economy behind it, consistently good economy. So that lets you get towards your good options, like, consistently in late game, like Elephant, Skirm, Hussar, Ballista Elephant, Hussar, Scorpion. And Scorpions and Ballista Elephant now get access to ballistics. Ballistics affects them, and those things are like basically like unstoppable unless you have specific counters like Bombard Cannon, Siege Onager, and like Monks with Redemption. Like basically your main options there to counter Ballista Elephant or Scorpion comps. So for those reasons, Khmer is an S tier for me. Next up, we have the Malay. Malay gets ahead from the start of the game by just being up 2 villagers in general. You also get free infantry armor throughout the game. You also get really good tech tree for like imp play. So like just like start of the game of just getting ahead, going for like archer line, then like a nice power spike in Castlage with a faster castle going into your crossbows, and then maybe like some cheap elephants to kind of buy some time, and then going into late game again with a faster imp, going into siege engineer, bombard cannons, arbalest. Then you also have something like karambits that can come out with free armor right away, which are like really annoying to deal with. If you're on skirms, your opponent's on archers, and then he gets karambits that get armor right away. It's so hard to counter a unit that's that cheap and easy to spam if you're on skirms, because then you have to tech switch to counter the karambits, but they don't have to commit to karambits. They can make 30 karambits, throw them all at you. You're like, oh shit, I have to react to this. And they spent only a few hundred resources on those. They can switch to something else. So if you switch to like, let's say Arbalest to deal with the karambits, they can end up hitting you with Skirm Bombard Cannon as their main comp. And then they can also throw on elephants on top of that. It just gets really nasty really fast. And I feel like the Mayans, and I feel like the Malay, close names, the Malay don't really have any weaknesses right now. And it feels unfair to play against them in a lot of cases. And if you're not outplaying the Malay player, usually you're going to be falling behind or losing the game. Last but not least, the 3 civs. We're going to actually go in order that they're present here. So it's going to be Wei in the next slot. Wei is not supported by the win rate. It has a 51 or 52% win rate at high elo, maybe 53, I don't remember. So I saw different ones for different elos, but it's not supported by the win rates. However, I think the civ is absolutely insane. It can get basically up to, let's do the math, horse collar, double bit axe, gold mining, stone mining, wheelbarrow. It can get up to 5 free villagers on a land map in feudal age. So you can just be at 5 vills. In Castlage, it's another 5 vills, because now it's like handcart, bow saw, both mining upgrades, and heavy plow. So you can be up 10 villagers just by getting economy upgrades in the mid game, all right, in the feudal age and Castlage. And the reason why that's really strong is that you also have really good options for your army. This is different to something like the Bengalis. Bengalis gets ahead in vills but lacks everything, okay? Wei gets ahead in vills and you have everything. So you have Xianbei Raiders, which are basically a better CA. They're like insane. They have a charge attack. They're cheaper, easier to mass. They do a lot of damage. They got buffed a lot. Like they originally were the worst unit in the game. They got buffed a lot since then. It's a very strong unit to lean on. And the Wei play the Xianbei Raider incredibly well on like a 1 TC play. And on top of that, their Tiger Cavalry is insane. It's basically a paladin-esque unit in Castle Age, and the elite version's even better in Imp. It's an insane unit. Their Haguan cavalry is basically what you make against melee units. So it's a cavalry that's against. It's like a knight replacement, but it basically beats a lot of melee comps because they get a tech that gives them extra melee armor. And then the Tiger Cav is an all-purpose unit, but it specifically beats archer units, and it's absolutely insane. But the way basically get good economy, good army at all points in the game. Their biggest weakness is just like not getting access to regular trebs or bombard cannons. So you have to play with traction trebs, which are sometimes good but sometimes bad. I didn't talk about traction trebs much. I'm going to talk about them for the shoe though. But yeah, I think the way do get cheaper traction trebs, 25% cheaper. So if traction trebs are good in the certain game that you're playing, then it ends up being a really good late game for the way. But overall, I think the way are an amazing civ, and definitely one that if you play them correctly, they will feel amazing. If you don't play them correctly, though, they could feel weak because you only get like +2 Vils, Horse Collar, Bidax in the early feudal, and if you don't survive early feudal, then you could start falling behind, and yeah, the civ doesn't feel good. So it's a bit slow to start, but it really picks up the pace, and it's one of the best mid to late game civs in the game at the moment. Next up, we've got the shoe. So we'll talk about traction trebs here, but I first want to talk about how I thought the civ was horrible when it first came out. I was dead wrong, and I'm not afraid to say it. This civ is insane. It's hard to explain why even, but basically it just gets really good savings throughout the game on the archer line, which is like your main comp. But then it also gets one of the best unique units in the game. The White Feather Guard is insane. Like this unit is tanky, so it counters skirms. It counters eagles because it gets an attack bonus. It counters knights because it gets an attack bonus. And it also slows down enemy units when it hits them. So the White Feather Guard is absolutely insane at doing what the shoe need, being a good front line to defend the Arbalest behind that. And then as their siege unit, they go for the traction treb, which it sucks at certain things and it's amazing at other things. Like for example, it sucks at killing a castle on a hill. Simple as that. It's just bad at doing that. However, if you get like 10 of them, it's really good at hitting units. So you can get 15 range traction trebs with shoe that shoot multiple projectiles. And if you get 10 of those, you can shoot like 20 to 30 projectiles at your opponent. You kill like 5 or 10 units per volley, and then you just camp those. And you just move with that comp. And genuinely, Arbalest, White Feather Guard, Traction Treb, I think is the best comp in the game. I actually don't know what beats that, practically speaking. You would need some kind of like Poles late game that's raiding them to win against that comp. Or like with Bombard Cannon, Winged Hussar, Arbalest, or CA. Or some kind of Magyar late game, or something special to beat that comp. Because I don't know how, like, you can't fight into that comp. Their Arbalests get extra arrows as well. So even like Huskrulls don't do it. So it's really difficult to beat that composition. And on top of that, Shu also have a really good economy. So this ends up being one of the best civs in the game. And I think it's definitely OP. It feels really unfair to play against it. They get extra food from just chopping wood. So their 1 TC play is really good. Their Mangonels move a little bit faster. So like in the Mangonel War, Shu is very efficient. Again, I can just go on and on about why this civ just practically is so strong, even though it doesn't look that strong on paper. And it's also worth mentioning that the hero units of the Catans, the Shu, and the Wu are sometimes, sorry, not the Catan, the Wei, the Shu, and the Wu, the hero units are pretty solid. You can go into them, but they're not the reason for the civ to be good or bad. Anyway, back to the best civ in the game, Chinese. I actually have a separate Chinese video that's going to come out soon about why the civ is so hard to balance correctly, because Chinese have a 42% win rate in low elo, which is insane. Low elo being 800 to 1,000, so like the beginner level. In high elo, though, in 1900 plus, they have a 60% win rate. So a 40% win rate to a 60%, 40% win rate is considered horrible. 60% win rate is considered clearly overpowered. And yeah, I'm going to be basing my opinion on the 60% win rate, because I think 1900 plus is kind of like the standard for what you're going to be doing in a lot of cases or what you want to be doing in a game of 1v1 Arabia. And the Chinese are just doing everything for you consistently every game. You get ahead in Vils because your start is so good. Because there's neutral deer, you always get a good start with the Chinese now. So you can never get a bad start. You just look for the neutral deer, lure those. If you have chicken, all the better. If you have your own deer, you can just lure those. So you always get a good start with deer, which is important for the Chinese. Because you need the extra food, because you kind of burn through your food pretty quickly because you have those extra Vils. And so you get to feudal age with a 2 vill advantage, kind of like some of the other civilizations. If you notice here, 2 villagers advantage is usually really strong. And the biggest weakness, sorry, I will talk about one thing, but going into the mid game, you have a wide open tech tree with the Chinese, so kind of like the Malians, but you just up 2 vills for free. You have a really good tech tree. You lost the camels, which definitely hurts the Civ, but the Fire Lance is kind of like a good replacement, so it's nothing crazy lost there. And then going to the late game, which is supposed to be the weakness of Chinese. You don't get Bombard Cannon, no Hand Cannoneer, no Siege Engineers. The same speech I gave for the other civs, but it actually doesn't matter that much because on the snowbally version of Arabia, you can just end the game by picking up so much advantage. And you now get Fire Lancers, which are such a good late game option. And on top of that, your Chukanu, you don't need a unique tech for them anymore. The elite upgrade gives you all the stats that were usually locked behind the unique tech. Unique tech now only affects rocket carts, which are another thing that Chinese can do really effectively in Imperial Age now. Is you can go rocket cart right away, heavy rocket cart, which is way better than just getting onager. It just performs better, and so Chinese end up being really strong because of those reasons that I mentioned. So their Imperial Age is no longer a weakness. You can go like Fire Lance to Siege Rams. The comp I died to the other day, and I had nothing to beat that. I was Turk late game. I had nothing. I was completely getting overrun. Fire Lance to Siege Ram. Just to give an idea of, just a possible late game comp that you can go for the Chinese. And I just feel like the Civ doesn't have any weakness. It's one of the few Civs in the game that just doesn't have any weaknesses start to finish. Their weaknesses are non-existent. And in the cases that they do have some kind of weakness, it's negligible. You can just do something else and it ends up working out fine. But I don't think it's a Civ that should get nerfed. That's the funny part. Like, how do you nerf the Civ? It has a 40% win rate for beginners. So yeah, what do? It's just broken and that's how it is, which is fun. But yeah, that's going to be my tier list. I put in a lot of effort into this. I've been talking for an hour and a half now. Edited it down. This should be like a maybe 1 hour, 10-minute video. I hope you guys did enjoy it. Please make sure to share this video wherever you can, Reddit, to your friends, Discord servers, because I want as many people to see it as possible. Because I do think this is beneficial to a lot of different players. And make sure to leave a like and comment your opinion to help the YouTube algorithm and help as many people see this video as possible, because it does take a lot of effort out of me, a lot of planning, a lot of talking as well. And yeah, if you guys did enjoy the video, make sure to like, comment, subscribe as always. And if you guys want to see more from me as far as getting better as a player, check out my Patreon. And if you want to watch my live stream, check out my Twitch channel in the description below. And if you're catching this before the China line, October 22nd of 2025, I will be having a pro player named Lewis casting the tournament that I'll be competing in on my Twitch channel. So you can just join my Twitch channel, follow up with that tournament, and you can watch me play live in a LAN event in China, which is really good because look at the top 3 civs. They're Chinese civs, guys. All right, connect the dots. Chinese civs are strong. LAN event in China. Hera streaming it. That has nothing to do with the rest, but I'll be streaming it on my channel. Lewis will be casting, and you guys can support me there and watch the competition live. But yeah, that's going to be it for the video. Take care, guys, and I'll see you in the next one. Peace.